Today, I have with me Global VP of Sales, Lewis Worlidge. Hi, Lewis. How are you?
Hey Brett, really good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You're so welcome. Did I pronounce your name right?
It's close enough. I'll let you off. Only
Do you
worked
want to
together for
say
over
it?
a year.
Do you want to say your name?
No, you're good. You did a good job, I promise.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Okay, great. So I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Today, we're going to chat about how to engage middle performers with gamification, which is something that we know really resonates with our customers, but also just generally sales managers across the board. With that being said, I would love to start off by asking you why you think motivating middle and bottom performers is so crucial to align to your overall sales strategy. Why is it such an important thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's one that's really close to not just mine, but I think everyone at SalesScreen's hearts. When we think about middle and bottom performers, like we think of it in terms of like how your employees are spread across those different levels in terms of their performance levels, right? So I think of it a little bit like a Venn diagram, right? You've got your top performers are the people in your audience that are just killing it. They're making money happen. They're self-motivated. They're going out there and making things happen. You've got your middle and bottom performers. The interesting thing about those two groups is that there's so much more room for growth in those two areas because they're not performing necessarily at capacity. They're the people that have got room and opportunity to do more. And if we think about the spread of those employees, you have a small group of your employees that are top performers. You have a really big group that are middle, kind of like hovering around that area where they could potentially go either way. And then you have your bottom performers, which are the guys that we really want to pick up off the ground and really support. But the important thing here is that your middle performers occupy such a large proportion of your workforce that it's a great area for us to be able to make improvements in. So it's a really important part of any sales team strategy because if you can get that piece right, you can really maximize your efficiency as a sales leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use something in SalesScreen that we talk about a lot, which is Bartle players and like how you break out your team into different player types, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about the different player types and kind of that spread on a sales team?
Yeah, do you know what? We love talking about Bartle's player types. I feel like we've almost adopted Dr. Bartle as part of our team.
You should
For
start
anyone
paying him.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, do we not? Okay, cool. For anyone that doesn't know, Bartle's player types are essentially different personas that are within the game setting, right? So obviously we're a gamification company, so we like to talk about gaming, we like to talk about competitions. And Bartle came up with these 4 different player types, and they're the different intrinsic motivations that different players have when they approach a game. So we've adopted those as things that are really important and relevant to sales teams. So when within that group, we have 4 different player types. We have your killers. Like I said, they're the ones that are just intrinsically motivated. They just will go out there, they'll hit a target, they'll smash a target. You don't need to spoon feed them what they need to do in order for them to be successful. So they're the people that, as a sales leader, you love to see just going out there and performing, and you want everyone to follow them. And then you also have these other different player types as well, that you have like what we call achievers, people that like to win awards, people that see a target, they want to go and hit it. We have like explorers that are people that I guess the best way you can relate to explorers is they're the people that like to go and explore and go and find things. So go and collect golden eggs and things like that. And then you have your socialites. Now, the socialites are really important because occupy about 70% of your sales team. These are people that like to win as a group. They want to work together to achieve a combined goal. And the interesting thing is when we think as a sales leader, you generally think in the terms of these killers. You're thinking about salespeople as just being people that want to go and win for themselves. And that's the case for some player types. But the thing is, if we really want to get the maximum efficiency from our sales team, we have to take care of our sales team in terms of those different personas. And the one that's really key without any question is those socialites. So it's finding ways that you can engage your team as a group and in a social setting rather than just in a lone wolf kind of environment.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think that we definitely see a lot when we're talking to prospects and we're talking to customers that a lot of sales managers are killers themselves. And that's how they've gotten into their role is that they've been so great at going after the gold, being on the top of the leaderboard, always hitting their targets and exceeding. And so they get the promotions. And so it really is like a one-track mind of, okay, this is who I am. So that's how my team operates. And that's just not how sales is anymore.
I feel like you're throwing that one at me, but it is absolutely true. Like, what's the last sales manager that you know that got promoted because of the fact that they were really good at like team camaraderie? It's always the same, right? When you perform well, you get the opportunity to progress into another opportunity. So you do generally find those sales leaders are the killers within the team. So that's their motivation. So you often see that reflected in how they look after the people in their team.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So I'd love to know some insights on the impact that motivated middle and bottom performers can have on overall team productivity and your sales outcomes? I feel like this is a little bit of a throwaway question, but I still want to know from your experience, what has that been like?
It comes back to that same point, right? Look, instead of just focusing on the 10% of our audience, we're thinking about the other 90%. So the benefit and the impact is really obvious. The fact is that we actually have an opportunity, rather than just always be thinking about the people that are already there at the top. There's another 90% of people in that sales team. And right now, how much love are they getting? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the thing is that if we can really think about ways that we can engage that group, and very personalized ways that we can appeal to the motivations that they have, then inevitably it's going to have an impact in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, you actually create an environment where you're thinking about your whole team rather than just thinking about a small proportion of it. But also, all of a sudden, you're empowering people, right? So where people often look at those killers, or they look at those people at the top of the leaderboards and they think, okay, I'm just going to be a little bit more quiet because they're the people that are performing. They can have the biggest voice. We've all been in that situation where there's something we wanted to talk to our boss about, but we're just waiting until that next deal comes in before we can talk to them about it. But what you ultimately do when you think about these different groups and take care of them and essentially look after them in a way that you don't do when you're focusing only on the top of the leaderboard, you give those people more of a voice. And that really helps, right? That creates a much stronger culture across the team. And it takes a little bit of pressure off the top people at the top, honestly, because it means they feel part of a bigger team rather than feeling the responsibility of everyone else around them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think it brings up something that we don't often talk about a lot when we're talking about motivating and middle bottom performers. We talk a lot about the benefits of doing that, and by not motivating them, you're leaving money on the table. But I think there's another really important element of top performer burnout, of when you have a team and you have one person that is consistently hitting the goals, it's really dependable like that. And as a sales manager, constantly relying on them to do that for your team and carry the team, it people can get burnt out on that so quickly.
And the thing is, it's just not
Yeah.
sustainable, right? Short-term gains, but potentially over a longer period of time, you're killing the effectiveness of your sales team because you're just relying on a few individual performers within that group. That's no good for them, and that's no good for the people around them. Because the other thing it ultimately does is that when you're just relying on a few people, the other people in that group don't necessarily feel motivated in a way that you want them to. And what they're going to do? Maybe they just crack on, maybe they just plod along at a very kind of okay level, they're fine with what they're doing, or they move on. And without taking this conversation into a completely different area, every sales manager knows the last thing you want in your sales team is people leaving it that are performing at a reasonable level when
Yeah.
you can improve them. There's the cost and the expense in terms of resource of recruiting is a huge piece of the puzzle for sales managers. The absolute last thing you want to have to do if you have people in that team that are capable of doing the job.
Yeah, it's such a good point because it is so expensive to try and find talent. It's so expensive and time consuming to bring talent on and onboard them and get them into the process and have them understand the product and out into the field actually making money. There's such a long ramp up time for that.
Yeah, and shameless plug, Brit, but SalesScreen is recruiting at the moment. So we have a job ad out there on LinkedIn at the moment. Feel free to, if you are a killer or you're
Yeah, you
someone
guys,
that aspires to be one, get yourself on there and apply.
not just a killer. If you're a
Not just
socialite,
a killer.
we love all of our player types. We love all our player types. That's the great thing about SalesScreen is that we motivate all player types. So it doesn't matter what you are, it doesn't matter your style. All right. So what would you say, Lewis, is some of the bigger challenges that you've encountered as a sales manager, either here or somewhere else, when motivating middle and bottom performers? And how did you address those challenges?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question. I think it always depends on the environment that you're working in. So I've worked in a lot of
Mm,
different types of sales environment. And I think the guys in our team always hear me talking about it and they probably get bored of me talking about all these interesting sales environments that I've worked in. I think the one that was the most tricky for me was like back at the beginning of my career, I worked in the recruitment industry. And so I came in fresh, like straight out of college. And that environment's a tough environment. Anyone that's worked in recruitment, I think when you're selling a product that is a moving part, essentially another person, you're selling a person to a person, essentially. You'll create that connection between two different groups. It's really tricky. You have to work really hard. And not only that, but you're working with people that are trying to speak to you out of hours. So it's long hours, it's long days. And it is a tough old gig. It's one of those environments where it's like a real boiler room. And I think one of the things that's always been challenging in an environment like that is how do you maintain the motivation of people across the team? So it comes back to this same point that there's always going to be people sat at the top. But this is an industry that has a high rate of churn. It also has a high rate of burnout. In order to make that a successful group, I think it's like, how do you motivate the people that aren't necessarily always performing? Example, I think we've talked about this once, I think in like a random conversation at one point. But one of the things that we did, we tried to create an environment where culture was first. Now, not every environment is the same. So, what culture means to the company I work for in recruitment is not the same as what culture means to SalesScreen or to another organization. So in that particular environment, it was a tough old gig, and we were like essentially comrades together, working really hard to get through the day. So when what culture meant to us was sometimes a little bit more brutal than it would be in a more positive environment, to put it bluntly. So I think I've told you about this one,
Hmm.
but we used to have a competition that we used to run. Whoever came bottom of the leaderboards had to wear a chicken suit and go and pick up the coffees from down the road at the local coffee shop. So I'm not professing that should work for every sales team. Like, it is not the sort of thing that's going to create the right type of buzz for everyone. But for us, in that crappy, tough boiler room that was like a sweat box and we used to just absolutely grind it out, that was the highlight of our week. And yeah, once a week, someone had to really go out there and like really put themselves out in the cold and just have a miserable day because of it. But we all did it once at least. We all probably did it about 15 times. So it became a real like part of our DNA. So it's always challenging, and it's about being creative and coming up with ideas that are relevant to your group as opposed to just a generic one size fits all. When you're a sales manager, it's very tempting to go into a new sales environment and just want to take the ways that you've done things, your structures, your processes, your playbook, you want to bring that all in and do it exactly the same each time. But the whole idea of Bartle's player types is that you need to appeal to your audience as opposed to always making it a one size fits all.
How did you guys always go to the same coffee shop? Did they always know like
And we're talking about
the
20
same?
years ago. I think it was Angelo's. And this is a really boring but like nice little side story. But this was in a town called Richmond. If you're familiar, it's where Ted Lasso is set. So it's a beautiful town. And these like group of kids that we were descended upon it to come and set up a recruitment company. We weren't setting up ourselves, but working for this recruitment company.
Yeah.
And we were just turning up in town with chicken suits and like down to Angelo's beautiful little alleyway coffee shop. Yeah, it was fun, but I don't think it was for the locals. I think we probably knocked the property value down a little bit when we turned up.
That's hilarious. But I think that it also raises a really good point about culture and like the way that your culture is. I think that for SalesScreen, we lean heavily into positive reinforcement. The worst thing that we ever made anyone do is do push-ups on an all hands meeting, which is embarrassing in itself, depending on which is why we took that out of our reward shop. But I think that the type of culture that you have is really important because I think also we do talk about SalesScreen as being a really positive reinforcement tool. We talk about SalesScreen motivating all of these players and that type of stuff. But I think it's also important to talk about how sales is hard. Sales is a really hard job and it requires a really specific personality type and mentality type that not everybody has. And sales also has a relatively low barrier to entry. Like you could get into sales very easily. Like you could do a fresh out of college recruitment center where you're just on the phones all day or a call center.
I always dreamt to be a salesperson. I don't think it's not the way that it happens, is it? We all had our different
Yeah, you
dreams and
do.
they
You
didn't
kind
quite
of,
come to fruition.
yeah, you do. It is something that like you can very easily fall into. And I think that sometimes it's good to be able to identify the people. They're here because they have a skill, they have a talent, they can do this thing. And maybe they need a little bit more attention, or maybe they just need to be motivated in the right way, or whatever. And that will unlock something for them. But there's also going to be a group of people that this profession is just not the ideal profession for them. And I think that,
I would say I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in here. I would say there's this kind of traditional approach to like sales teams where I don't think you see it quite so much now. We talk a lot more positively about like the role of salespeople and how tough a grind it is. But back in the day, if I think back, one of the things that was definitely the case is you would marginalize someone that wasn't performing. You would probably marginalize someone
mhm.
that doesn't look too engaged in what they're doing. But what we probably didn't do at the time, and I don't want to like look at it all nostalgically or look back at how great we are now, but one of the things I think we were a little bit less good at is like giving them an opportunity, giving them the tools that they needed. We live in a culture now where we have a lot of tech platforms that we can use. Sometimes we have too many, but at the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to arm people with the right tools so that they essentially what you need to do is be able to take away the excuses because there are good reasons as to why someone might not be successful. And generally something that we talk about at SalesScreen, just simply because we specialize in gamification and visualization, is the idea that if people don't know what good looks like, how can they be expected to perform at a good level? not
Yeah.
only in terms of gamification, but in terms of just being able to see what the folks that are sat next to you are doing right, that are getting them to that level. So I do think there's a
Yeah.
really strong argument to say there is more to a salesperson that isn't performing than just because they don't care or they don't want to or they're not necessarily right for it. There are absolutely some people that aren't right for sales, but the only way you're ever going to find that out is not by marginalizing them, it's by supporting them and actually giving them the opportunity to perform and then figure out whether they can do it and whether they want to do it or not.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to that point, I would love to ask, like, with gamification, how would you do that? What are some of the tools that you have in your toolbox that you use on your team or that you give to customers on ways to motivate and support those middle and bottom performers? I'd love to get some tangible examples if you have any.
It feels like a bit of a cheat code asking me right now because we've just got back from a team trip to Morocco where it's like if there's ever a cheat
Ooh.
code to get people feel good about where they work and what they're doing, it's like getting everyone together or sat around a pool in Morocco, right? And a real life example, what's more realistic, the one time we've done it, normally what we do is we sit at a computer and we're on Zoom meetings, or maybe we're sat in a boiler room, I don't know. I think it's about creating an environment that gives people access to those type of tools first and foremost, but specifically talking about gamification. Of course, we're a gamification company, right? We try and create competitions that like engage with everyone. So first and foremost, like it's easy to create a competition. Companies do it all the time. They don't necessarily need a sales screen to do it. You create a leaderboard, do it up on the whiteboard. And we talk to a lot of our prospects and customers, and you see the whiteboard in the background. It's a great tool, right? Just get people marking up their
Yeah.
numbers on the board, going up there, going putting their own numbers up. Even my first day in sales in recruitment, it was go and rack up a deal, go and rack up a meeting. You get to go and walk up to the board. Everyone gives you a cheer when you do it. In today's we have more tools at our disposal, so like in SalesScreen, one of the things that we implement is like different competition types. So we have a leaderboard, we have a straight leaderboard. It's a great tool to really focus on top performance, but we also implement a whole bunch of other gaming types. So for example, we have things called brackets. They're really awesome fun, like the equivalent of like March Madness, where you have a knockout competition. They're great for
Yeah.
short term bursts of activity on certain specific metrics or key different behaviors that we want to really promote over a shorter period of time. We have competitions that are like lotteries where like you can have get as the more you play, the more entries you get. At the end of the competition, you draw a lucky winner. The great thing about those is, let's say for example, you are a top performer, you might get 100 of one particular metric, you might make 100 dials, right? If you're not a top performer, you're still going to make 40, 50, 60 dials. You're still like motivated, you're still creating like lots of activity, you still get 40 or 50 entries into that lottery. So there are ways that we can essentially make it so that people feel like they've got a chance of winning, that they're part of the game, even if they aren't necessarily always the one that's sat at the top of the tree. So again, it's about being personalized, it's about being like culture focused and creating an environment where everyone's involved as opposed to just the top few.
Yeah, and it's a perfect segue into my next question, Lewis, which is what does the role of recognition and reward play in motivating middle and bottom performers?
Now you're tearing me up, and also you're like setting me up for talking about myself again. I spent about 15 years working in reward and recognition, so this is something really
Hmm.
close to my heart. When I first saw SalesScreen's product, the thing that really struck a chord with me is essentially reward and recognition for salespeople specifically. But reward and recognition is absolutely critical. When you work in a sales environment, you're working on a commission basis, whether that's 100% commission, 50% commission, 20% commission. As a salesperson, you're trained and your thought process is not always, but the majority of the time is thinking about how do I generate more revenue. Reward and recognition are a really critical part for sales teams, specifically because you can reward behaviors that are really important to a sales team that might just take a little bit longer to result in revenue. I'm talking about is recognizing behaviors in your sales team that aren't necessarily that quick route to a deal. And there are
Yeah.
certain really great behaviors that you want to recognize that you can't do through revenue, you can't do through commission. So reward and recognition plays a critical part in that, but it also recognizes the silent assassins that are in your team, people that don't make a big noise, people that don't ring the bell every time they go and do something really good that like benefits the team. So as a manager, it's a great tool at your disposal to support people that do great things that don't necessarily always get the recognition for it, either because they're doing things that are long-term gain or because they just don't have a loud voice within that team. So you create an environment where you give credit and kudos to those folks.
Yeah, it's so true because we talk about this a lot too, that sales is such a slog, right? Like it's like a little bit of a slog, right? You're doing a lot of repetitive activities every day, whether it's like making phone calls or doing outreach or trying to get meetings, like whatever the case is, going door to door if you're in field sales. It can be very isolating. And I think that one of the things that SalesScreen does really well is it bubbles to the surface all of those daily activities. And I think something that in my previous jobs that I've noticed is that salespeople are always working. They're working day in, day out. They're staying late. They're working weekends. Like they're always on the grind. But the only people that ever really get shouted out are the people that are closing those big deals, right? The only people that are getting like the big recognition from the company, from the CEO, whatever, that getting pulled on stage at sales kickoff are the people that are closing the biggest deal of the year. And that's so demoralizing for the people
Yeah.
that, for the sellers that are working tirelessly every single day. And the other thing about sales too is that it's so out of your hands. This isn't just my job to a degree is easy, right? Because, oh, you need me to create a podcast? No problem. I'll wrangle Lewis into to do this podcast. I'll force Lewis to do this podcast with me. Trying it, even when it's like trying to get customer stories, like you are dependent on another person that is not as interested in hitting your goals as you are to participate with you and to play ball with you. And so it just means there's so much more unpredictability and that there's so much that as a salesperson, it's just out of your hands. Like you could be working a deal for 2 years and they get a new champion come in and they're like, nah, never mind. We don't want this anymore. And the deal's dead. Like, what a punch to the gut.
You're not going to hear me complain about this one because I was always taught the same, and I'd always say the same to the sales guys: is control whatever you possibly can. The better we can maintain control, absolutely. There are obviously times where we can only do so much, where we reach the limit. You can only control the controllables. But a lot of those things, like you talked about, ideas around getting references, doing customer videos, these intangibles are things that aren't directly going to relate to a deal, and that's why there has to be some kind of motivation behind them. And one thing that SalesScreen is really great
Yeah.
at is spotlighting the activities that one get us closest to revenue, but also reward the things that happen outside of that really tight pocket of things that we put the spotlight on, where we have short-term gains that we want to generate. So for example, when we're looking for reviews online, like G2 reviews and things like that, being able to create incentives and rewards for those is a great business benefit, even if it doesn't directly reward that individual. So we have some really great tools at our disposal to be able to actually support in terms of doing the things that are going to help us long term.
Yeah, definitely. All right, amazing. Last question, and it's a real brain buster for you. So be ready. What advice would you give to other sales managers looking to increase the motivation and performance of their entire team?
It's a very big question, and I'm going to repeat myself. I'm going to parrot a little bit here. This is for me, like, I've only been with SalesScreen for a little over a year. So like I come in relatively fresh to a team that's been established over a really long period of time. And I think the key thing, I think, when I think about how you can motivate the performance of your whole team, you've really got to get around that team and really make it personal and like important that every person within that group feels like they play a key role in it. And they do. And that's the point, right? So it's very easy just to take that for granted. Everyone's playing a part, all the cogs are working together to do the do. But it's about having a personalized approach. Like we don't have it, we're a scale up company. So we have a relatively small team compared to some of the companies that we sell to. But even still, like everyone has different personalities within that team. Everyone has different motivations. And to just assume that we're a one size fits all in terms of what motivates everyone is completely outrageous, even if we have a common goal. So it's about personalization, it's about focusing on culture, and it's about creating an environment where the things that people get and what they get out of their role is individualized to them, and it's focused on the things that they want to gain from their career at SalesScreen. Again, it comes back to player types, and it's all about making sure that there is a group of people that all feel like they're being taken care of and feel like that if they do the right thing, the company will take care of them and drive them forward in their career. It's a little bit, what's the word? It's a little bit airy fairy, but I think if we're keeping it really super broad here, I think that's what it comes down to. It comes down to personalization, and it comes down to supporting those individuals so they feel like that they're valued and that they always have the tools at their disposal.
Yeah, I love that. You know me, I'm a big softie, so I like ending on a culture note.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot one thing, and also invest in SalesScreen, obviously. So I can't help but have to say that on a SalesScreen podcast with SalesScreen people. So buy SalesScreen, it's a really great tool to do it. And genuinely it is, but obviously we can't not plug it. Buy SalesScreen.
I want to plug it too. All right, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lewis, for joining us today. It's really good conversation. I loved it. Where can they find you?
I am present and available on LinkedIn. You might often see me posting and congratulating our team on our successes, hopefully. And then also, if they really want it, on the demo button on SalesScreen, that's a really great way to find me too.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great way to find you. Amazing. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of From Pain Point to On Point. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and meet me back here in 2 weeks for another episode. Thank you again for joining. Thank you again, Lewis, for being my guest today.